Anna and I had been together for what felt like a solid few years. Our relationship had its ups and downs, as is the case with any marriage, but I always felt like we had a good balance. I was the type of guy who liked things to be consistent. I liked having a sense of what to expect, and it gave me a sense of control. Everything was going well. Anna, though, was a different story. She had this energy about her, like a kind of spark that lit up a room. She wasn't as inflexible as I was, to put it mildly. She had a different idea of what stability meant. She saw monotony, but it wasn't that she didn't appreciate what we had. I knew she did, but she had this creative side, always looking for something new and exciting to mix things up a bit. At first, it was one of the things I loved most about her. She kept things interesting. She'd come up with spontaneous plans that always pushed me out of my comfort zone, and I have to admit that it was good for me. But there was always this part of her that seemed like it was searching for something more, something different. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I mean, don't we all feel that way sometimes? Like we want something different. I had no idea that her enthusiasm ran deeper than I thought. Looking back, I think there were signs from the start that Anna had certain preferences when it came to the more personal side of our relationship. I didn't think much of it at first. We all have our own little quirks. As time went on, though, I started to notice a pattern. She was curious about things most people would avoid, things that weren't exactly conventional. At first, it was pretty subtle. It seemed like she was testing the waters with me, seeing how I'd react. I remember one time early on when I borrowed her laptop, I noticed something odd. I wasn't looking through her stuff or anything. I just needed to use it for a quick task. As I started typing in the search bar, a few suggestions popped up. They weren't what I was expecting, to say the least. I did a quick search for some items and initially dismissed it as just a random curiosity. I figured everyone has an occasional internet browsing session that takes them down a few unexpected paths. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but as we got to know each other better, I started to realize that this wasn't just a passing phase for her. Anna was always open to new ideas, which I appreciated. She was open-minded and adventurous, which I appreciated. But some of her interests in the bedroom were way beyond anything I had ever thought about. She'd bring up certain topics in conversation just casually at first, as if she was gauging my reaction. From the way she talked about it, I could tell that this wasn't just some fantasy for her. It was something she was genuinely interested in exploring. I'll admit that at first it caught me off guard a bit. It wasn't that I was against trying new things, but some of the things she hinted at were so specific that I'd never really considered going down that road. Anna had a way of making it seem like the most natural thing in the world. She'd say things like, "Don't you ever feel curious about what else is out there, or why stick to the same old when there's so much more we haven't tried?" Sometimes I'd see her doing more research on. She was doing her own thing, and I didn't always say anything. But I'd notice that she'd be up late on her phone or laptop, and when I glanced over, she'd quickly close whatever tab she was on. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't want to make her feel self-conscious about it. I figured it was just her thing, and if it made her happy, I wasn't going to judge. What really stood out to me was how passionate she was when she talked about it. I could see it in her eyes. She was really enthusiastic about it. She was really excited, like she was talking about a new adventure she couldn't wait to go on. I tried to keep up and show some interest, But I knew this wasn't just idle curiosity. It was clear that this was something she'd been thinking about for a while, maybe even before we met. It seemed like she'd been waiting for the right moment to really jump in. That made me wonder just how far she wanted to take it. When Anna first started sharing some of these ideas with me, I have to admit my initial reaction was pretty neutral. I wasn't completely opposed to trying new things, but there's a line between keeping things fresh and venturing into territory that just didn't seem necessary. I often teased her, "Why mess with a good thing?" She'd laugh, but I could tell she didn't quite see it my way. I have to admit that my initial reaction to these more unconventional ideas was pretty neutral. I wasn't completely opposed to trying new things, but there's a difference between keeping things fresh and venturing into territory that just wasn't necessary. I'd often joke with her, saying, "Why reinvent the wheel when it works perfectly fine?" She'd laugh, but I could tell she didn't quite see it my way on that. The main difference between us was that I felt like what we had was already enough. I didn't think our intimate life was lacking or in need of constant improvement. We had a good connection, and I was happy with that. Of course, there's always room to try new things, but I didn't see the need to go out of my way to explore things that seemed, frankly, a bit too unconventional for me. I tried to explain this to her. I told her, "I'm happy with what we've got, and I don't really feel the need to take things to that level. Given what we already have, I don't see the need to go to that level." I was fully supportive of her interest. I really tried to see her point of view. I just wanted her to feel like she could come to me with any questions or concerns she had. We had a few open conversations where I listened to her talk about why these things intrigued her. I could see she was really enthusiastic about it. I was trying to be supportive. My husband could meet her halfway on this. I told her I get it. I really do, but it's just not something I've ever been interested in. We can talk more about it if you'd like. After a while, I decided to give a few of her suggestions a try. Nothing too extreme. She had a couple of ideas she thought might be fun for both of us. I thought it was worth a try to experiment a little and see where it took us. I have to be honest. It was fine, all things considered. It was pretty good, all things considered. It wasn't a game changer, but it was a decent effort. We gave it a shot, and I could tell Anna was grateful for the effort, but for me, it didn't add much to what we already had. I wasn't quite as enthusiastic about it as she was. I kind of had my limits. I didn't want her to feel like I was completely dismissing her ideas, but at the same time, I didn't want to keep pushing myself into something that felt unnecessary. I told her, "We've tried a few things, and I'm happy we did, but I think that's as far as I'm willing to go on this." I was starting to think I might go with it. I figured that would be enough for now. Maybe she'd see that I was open to compromise, but also that I had my own limits. That seemed to do the trick. We found a happy medium where we didn't really discuss it much anymore. I figured she knew where I stood on the matter. I figured she was okay with that. I could tell she wasn't completely satisfied, but I thought we'd reached an understanding. That's what I told myself at the time. Anyway, one evening, we were relaxing in the living room after a long day when Anna started telling me a story she'd heard from one of her close friends. She had this excited look on her face, like she was about to share something interesting. She was telling me about her friend, who always had these little stories about her life. It seems that Lisa's husband had come home early from a business trip without any prior notice. Anna didn't go into too many details about the gift itself, but she made it clear that the gesture was what really mattered. He just showed up out of the blue, caught her off guard, and gave her something she'd been wanting for a while. She went on to explain, her eyes lighting up. Lisa was really pleased about it. She said it was one of the nicest things he'd ever done. Anna leaned back and smiled as she thought about the story. I think we could use more of that in our lives, she said, as if it were an afterthought. I could tell there was more to her words than she was saying. It's the little surprises that keep things interesting. She glanced over at me, probably checking my reaction. I kept my expression neutral so she wouldn't think I hadn't been paying attention. I also wanted to wait before making any assumptions. I nodded, taking it all in. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I had a vague idea start to form. Anna had mentioned before that she sometimes felt things had gotten a bit too predictable and routine. This seemed like one of those subtle hints she'd occasionally drop. I knew she wasn't asking me to do something like Lisa's husband's surprise, but the idea of doing something similar and catching her off guard in a way that made her feel appreciated started to stick with me. I remember thinking at the time, maybe I should do something like that for her one day. It wasn't just about the surprise itself. The idea was to shake up the routine of everyday life. As it turned out, she was right. Even in the best relationships, things can feel a little too comfortable. I wasn't the most spontaneous person, but I could see the value in mixing things up now and then. I filed that idea away for future consideration. I didn't say much to her about it at the time other than a casual, "Yeah, that's pretty cool," but I was already thinking about how I could do something similar myself. I wasn't going to rush into it, but I knew it was there, ready for when the time was right. I figured that if things felt stale or if she needed a bit of excitement, I'd have that option ready to go. A few months after that conversation about surprises, Anna got some news at work. They were moving her to a different department on a temporary basis, which didn't seem to be her idea of a good time. It was just a temporary change of pace. It was just a short-term assignment to help cover some staffing gaps. At first, she was a bit annoyed by the whole situation, but after a few days, she started to see things differently. One evening, she came home with this unexpected enthusiasm, and I could tell something had changed. As she walked into the kitchen, she was clearly excited. "I made a new friend at work today," she said. "Her name's Evelyn, and we hit it off right away." Anna went on to tell me how she and Evelyn had connected over lunch. From what I could tell, they had a lot in common, including similar tastes in music and books, as well as some shared experiences in their personal lives. I could tell that Anna was really happy about this new friendship, which wasn't something that happened often. I'm not the type to connect with just anyone. I was happy for her. It's always good to have someone at work you can talk to, especially when things get stressful. But knowing Anna, I couldn't help but wonder how deep this new connection went. I asked, with a raised eyebrow and a hint of humor, "Did you two connect on everything, or even on those kinds of topics?" I was talking about the more personal stuff that Anna has always been keen to chat about with me. These were the conversations about her specific interests, not the typical water cooler talk. She gave a little laugh that showed she knew exactly what I was getting at. She even said with a smile, "You'd be surprised. Evelyn is pretty open-minded. We had some great conversations today." I laughed along with her, But I also felt a little curious, not jealous, but curious. I knew Anna had a talent for building strong connections, especially when it came to the things she was passionate about. This new friendship seemed like it could lead to some deeper conversations. I didn't let it bother me too much. After all, it was just work, and everyone needs a friend they can talk to about things they can't always share at home. I figured if this temporary job shift makes Anna happier, then that's great. She wasn't unhappy with her old role, but this new challenge and new friends seemed to be giving her the fresh start she'd been looking for. Anna kept mentioning Evelyn. She said they'd meet for coffee during their breaks or catch up about their lives outside of work. Every time she mentioned Evelyn, it was clear that their friendship was developing quickly. "Evelyn gets me," Anna said, as if she was surprised to have found someone who understood her on that level. I tried not to dwell on it too much. I figured it was best to let her have the space when it came to the specifics of what they discussed. But the more I heard about Evelyn, the more I wondered what kind of influence she might have on Anna. I didn't bring it up, though, because at that point it all seemed harmless, and I figured Anna would work it out eventually. It was just a professional friendship, after all. A few weeks later, though, my job took an interesting turn. My boss pulled me into a meeting out of the blue and said there was a good chance I'd be sent on a business trip. I was offered the trip, but it wasn't confirmed yet. I was on the short list to go on the trip because an important client needed attention, and I was one of the people who could go. There was also talk of a pretty hefty bonus if the trip went well, which would be great for us at the time. The cash incentive was enough to get me excited, even if I wasn't thrilled about being away for a bit that evening. I met up with Anna to fill her in on what had happened. She was in a surprisingly good mood when I walked in. She seemed more relaxed than I'd seen her in a while. I let her know that I might be heading out of town for work soon. It could be a great opportunity for us, and there's a good bonus on the table if we get it all done successfully. Anna's eyes lit up right away. She seemed genuinely excited. "I'm heading out of town for work soon, and it could be a great opportunity for us. There's a good bonus on the table if we get everything done successfully." Anna's eyes lit up right away. "That's great," she said, sounding genuinely enthusiastic. I wasn't sure if she was excited about the money, the idea of me getting ahead at work, or maybe just having some time to herself, but whatever it was, she seemed to be all for it. "When do you think you'll know for sure?" "They haven't confirmed the dates yet." I said, "It could be within the next month or so." "Nothing's confirmed yet." She nodded and gave a little smile. "That sounds great. I'm sure you'll knock it out of the park, and you know it'll be good for you. You've been putting in the hours." She took a moment to add, "To be honest, things have been going really well at work for me lately, too. I feel like this change, meeting Evelyn, and the new role have really been what I needed to move forward. It's like everything's coming together at the same time. I feel like I've..." She seemed really happy as she said it, like she'd found something new that gave her a new sense of purpose or drive. I was happy to hear that she'd been feeling a bit stuck for a while, and I'd noticed how restless she could get. I knew the new position wasn't permanent, but it seemed like it could be a good fit for us. "I'm glad to hear you got the change you needed. I know you needed something different. It seems like this situation is working out for both of us." She agreed, and you could tell she was thinking it over. It's funny how things change sometimes, isn't it? I hadn't realized that. I didn't realize how much I needed a change until I got one. I've got a new outlook on things now. I wasn't sure what she meant, but I was happy for her. She was going through a bit of a rough patch before the department shift. It was great to see her getting back to her old self again. At the time, I didn't think about it too much. I didn't know much about it at the time. I was more thinking about the potential trip and what it might mean for my career. If this trip goes ahead, it'll be a big deal for us. It'll be great for our finances, and it'll help build the momentum I've been building at work. As we kept talking, I felt like we were finally on the same page. It was a great time for us both. She was full of new energy at work, and I had this possible opportunity on the horizon. I had no idea things were about to change so much. The day of the trip finally came around. I'd been preparing for it all week, packing twice as much as usual. I made sure I had everything I needed for the meetings and got myself mentally ready. This wasn't my first business trip, but it felt more important than usual. There was a bonus on the line, and I knew that if I played my cards right, it could lead to bigger things down the road. Anna was a huge help, which made me feel more relaxed that morning as I was getting ready to head out. She was tied up with something, but she'd mentioned earlier that she'd be taking care of a few women's errands while I was away. She didn't get into specifics, though. I didn't ask. It wasn't the first time she'd made a vague reference to things I didn't necessarily need to know about. She also mentioned that she was meeting up with Evelyn later in the day. Since Anna moved to the new department, she and Evelyn have been spending more time together. It looks like their friendship is getting stronger while I'm away. I'll finally have a chance to catch up on some things. She handed me a cup of coffee that morning and said, "I'll be catching up with Evelyn for lunch, and I've got a few other things on my schedule. It'll be nice to have a little space to myself for a bit." I gave her a smile in return. I was happy she had something to keep her busy while I was away, but mostly because I didn't have to herd any of those intimate conversations she and Evelyn seemed to bond over lately. I've always felt a bit out of my depth when it comes to those topics, so it was a relief to know she had someone else to talk to about them. It gave me a sense of peace as I got ready to head out. "Sounds good," I said, taking a sip of the coffee. "I'm glad you'll have time to get some things done. I'll be in meetings most of the day, but I'll try to check in when I can." Anna gave me a smile and a quick kiss on the cheek. "Don't worry about me. Just focus on your trip and make those meetings happen. We can touch base when you get back." She seemed genuinely relaxed, which made me feel more at ease, too. I was actually looking forward to the brief time apart. It wasn't that things had been bad between us, but it's always good to give a relationship a little space now and then. On top of that, I was happy to avoid those conversations about her specific interests. I had a few days to kill before my flight, so I decided to catch up with Evelyn. I figured I'd have plenty to do with work anyway, so I grabbed my luggage and left. Anna gave me a casual good luck, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. Everything seemed normal and routine. There was no tension, and nothing gave away that anything was wrong. I got on the plane, found my seat, and got down to work. I had no idea this trip was going to have such a big impact. The first couple of days went by really quickly. Meetings, presentations, dinners with clients. It was just what I expected, and the workload kept me fully occupied despite the busy schedule. I made sure to touch base with Anna regularly. I texted her in the morning and gave her a call in the evening just to check in and make sure everything was going well back home. She usually replied, She was in good spirits right away, but after a few days, I noticed a pattern around mid-afternoon. I tried to get a hold of her between meetings, but she didn't answer at first. I didn't think much of it at the time. She told me she'd be running errands and meeting up with Evelyn, so it made sense she might be busy. But when it happened a few times in a row, I started to wonder what was going on. Every day between 4 and 6 p.m., I couldn't get a hold of her. I tried calling at different times, sometimes earlier in the afternoon, sometimes later in the evening, and she'd pick up without issue. But those 2 hours were always silent. She didn't seem bothered when I brought it up casually, saying she'd just been busy or out of the office. I didn't want to pry. After all, she didn't have to be available 24/7. We all have our own schedules to stick to. That was the first time I had a feeling that something wasn't quite right. I wasn't suspicious, exactly, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. What could she be doing every day at that time? I think it was probably Evelyn. I figured they were hanging out. She was out more often, and Anna had mentioned that they sometimes had in-depth conversations. She had her own life, and I wasn't one to pry. I figured it was nothing to worry about. Then I remembered that conversation we had a few months ago about surprises. Anna made a joke about how her friend's husband came home. One day, she gave me a gift. That really made an impression on me. She'd been saying how she wished there were more surprises in life and little spontaneous gestures that shook things up. I didn't really think much about it at the time, but now it seems like the perfect opportunity. That window of time from 4 to 6 p.m. on Monday. When she was out of reach, it seemed like the perfect time to plan a surprise. I wouldn't expect anything in return, and I could finally give her the kind of unexpected gesture she'd been longing for. I started to imagine how she'd react if I came home a day early with a thoughtful gift, catching her off guard. I felt like it was the right thing to do to bring some of that spontaneity back into her life and show her that I'd been listening all along. I decided I'd come back a day early. I kept my return date a secret from the trip and planned the perfect surprise. I had no idea the surprise waiting for me would be bigger than anything I could have imagined. The business trip wrapped up sooner than I thought it would, and I felt good about how the meetings went. I was full of ideas and strategies to run by Anna when I got home. I had something up my sleeve, so I decided to come back a day early. I was really looking forward to seeing her face when I got back. As I drove up to our house, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. I was excited, but also a little nervous. I was ready to put my plan into action to make her feel special and appreciated, but as I pulled into the driveway, I saw that Anna's car was parked in its usual spot. I thought it was a little odd. I figured she might be out running some errands. Or maybe she was spending time with Evelyn. I thought I saw a hint of confusion, but I decided to let it go. Maybe she'd just gotten back. Or perhaps she was home working on some of those errands she mentioned. I walked up to the door, my heart racing with excitement. I was already picturing how I'd present my surprise, what I'd say, and how she'd react. I opened the door quietly, trying to be stealthy. The house was pretty quiet, except for the faint sound of the TV in the background. I called out, "Anna, I'm home." But there was no answer. That's when I started to feel a bit uneasy. I took a few steps inside, and I was immediately greeted by the familiar smell of home as I made my way down the hallway. I had a sudden feeling of uncertainty. I thought maybe she was busy and didn't hear me. I wondered where she could be. I walked into the bedroom, and that's when I heard a muffled sound. I heard a voice I didn't recognize, mixed with Anna's laughter. I was curious and a little bit scared, so I opened the bedroom door just a crack. What I saw next was something I never expected to see. Anna was there, but she wasn't alone. The scene was pretty shocking and jarring, and I just stood there, frozen in disbelief. I'd stumbled upon something that threw my day off kilter. My heart was racing, and my mind was trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I realized I'd witnessed something I'd never imagined was possible. It was a scene that would have a big impact on everything. I was standing there in the doorway, and it was like I was looking at something from another world. Anna was there, completely exposed and bound. Her face showed a mix of surprise and something else I couldn't quite identify. My mind was trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The atmosphere was thick with an uneasy, tense energy. My heart was racing uncontrollably in my chest. What's going on here? I finally got out, speaking in a low voice. The words came out of me like a reflex as I tried to make sense of the situation that was unfolding around me. Anna's eyes got really big, and for a second, she seemed like she didn't know what to say. She looked shocked and embarrassed. "Oh, it's not what it seems," she said, her tone almost frantic as she tried to explain. "I was just trying out something new." The way she said it, like it was no big deal, made me doubt what I was hearing. I was questioning what I had been taught, and the sudden revelation left me feeling more confused than ever. I was trying to figure out how this had become our reality. Before I could process what was going on, the bathroom door opened and a short guy stepped out. He emerged from the steam, looking calm and relaxed, as if he'd just finished a quick shower. I stood there, frozen, and the sight of him only added to how absurd the moment was. My heart sank a little more as I took in this scene. Anna was vulnerable and tied up, and this unexpected intruder seemed totally at ease in the situation. He glanced between Anna and me, seemingly unfazed by my presence. It felt like something out of a bizarre movie scene. It was a reality that was way beyond anything I could have imagined. I was feeling a mix of anger and confusion. My mind was racing as I tried to make sense of what had happened while I was away. How did we end up here? How could she have been so bold as to invite someone into our home, let alone into our private space? "Anna, what's going on here?" I asked again. I was taken aback and felt betrayed, and my voice reflected that. I was really hoping for some clarity and an explanation that would help me get back to the world I thought I knew. The moment was full of possibilities, and I realized I was standing on the brink of something that could change everything. As I waited for her reply, I felt a growing sense of hurt. My heart was heavy with the weight of this unexpected news. The shock of the moment quickly turned into anger. I felt the heat rising in my chest as I looked at the small man, who seemed perfectly at home in our home. "You need to leave now," I said, in a low but firm voice. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just an invasion of my personal space, but also a betrayal of everything we'd built together. "If you don't leave right now, I'll probably regret it later." The man paused for a moment, looking at Anna, who seemed confused and upset. "Come on, man. It's not what you think," he started, but I cut him off. Don't even try to explain, I said firmly. You need to leave. I'm not going to let you stay on. I moved closer, my heart racing, to make it clear that I meant business. The atmosphere in the room was tense, and I could see the realization slowly dawn on him. He took a step back and saw what was at stake, so he left quickly. I felt a mix of relief and frustration. Once he was gone, I turned my attention back to Anna, who was still tied up and looking pretty distressed. Can you tell me what this is all about? I asked, my voice showing my frustration. How could you do this? How could you let him into our lives like this? I needed something different, something you couldn't provide. He was just someone who got me, she said, her voice rising in frustration. I was really hurt. If he's the only one who gets you, maybe you should go with him. I didn't mean to come across as harsh. Anna's eyes filled with tears as she pleaded with me, but it felt like I was gathering her things and putting them in a bag. It felt a bit surreal, but I had to go. I needed to take some time to think things through. As I packed her things, I could still hear her objections in the background, but I had to stay strong. This wasn't the life I recognized, and I needed to take a stand. I put the last of Anna's things into a bag and turned to her. You need to leave, I said, my voice calm and steady despite the chaos inside me. The emotional roller coaster I was on. I can't do this. I can't live in a house where trust has been broken like this. The finality of my words hung in the air, and I could see the realization wash over her. Her eyes showed the hurt and disbelief she felt. Please don't do this, she said, her voice trembling a little. We can work through this. I didn't mean for things to get this far, but I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. I gave her chances, and now I need to take a stand for myself. This wasn't just a one-off mistake. It was a breach of everything. I thought we were on the same page, but I've decided I've made up my mind. I replied firmly, making it clear that I wasn't backing down. I can't keep living like this. I'm considering filing for divorce. The word felt like it was stuck in my throat. It's a decision that will have a big impact on our lives. I could see her expression change from shock to sadness, but I knew I couldn't be swayed after she left. I felt a strange mix of emptiness and relief. I picked up the phone and gave my best friend a call to let them know what had just happened. As the phone rang, I was taken aback by how quickly everything had happened. When he answered, I could hear the confusion in his voice. Hey, what's up? I let him know that I'm getting a divorce. I blurted out the words, like a dam that had burst. I'm afraid that things have come to an end between Anna and me. You wouldn't believe what just happened. I filled him in on the details, and I could hear the shock in his voice, which matched my own feelings of disbelief and hurt. It was a relief to finally get it all out and have someone really supportive there for me. He was sorry and asked what he could do to help. I told him I just wanted to block out the noise in my head and that a couple of beers would be good. He seemed to understand, so I went to the fridge to get a couple of beers. I grabbed 2 bottles from the fridge. I had this feeling that things were about to change in some way. It was a little intimidating, but it also felt like a fresh start. It was a chance to get my bearings back after everything that had happened. As time went on, I started to understand what the divorce process would involve. I never thought I'd be in this situation or going through it. The legal separation and emotional fallout, the paperwork, meetings with lawyers, and discussions about dividing our lives all felt pretty overwhelming. But even though it was all pretty chaotic, there was a strange sense of clarity underneath it all. I was finally making decisions for myself, and they felt right after everything I'd been through. Anna reached out and suggested we take another look at things. She sent me messages apologizing and saying that things could change. Each message was a mix of regret and longing, but I found it harder and harder to relate to the person I had once loved. Her words didn't seem to mean much, especially after everything that had happened. I didn't get back to her right away. I told her I needed a bit of time to think things over before we met to discuss the divorce. Her eyes were red from crying, and I could see she was hurt. "I messed up," she said. "Please, I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Please, just give me another chance," she said. "I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Please, I'd really like another chance." I felt sorry for her, but I reminded myself of the reality of the situation. We'd been through this together. I shook my head, my voice steady but sad. "Anna, if you could betray my trust once, how can I ever be sure it wouldn't happen again? Trust is the foundation of any relationship. I can't just let this go." The atmosphere was tense. It was a fact that was hanging in the balance. I realized that, despite my feelings for her, I needed to focus on my own well-being. As the divorce proceedings continued, each step felt like both a burden and a relief as I signed the final papers. It was the end of a chapter that had become too painful to continue. I knew it wouldn't be easy to move on, but I was determined to reclaim my life, one step at a time. In the months that followed, I focused on rediscovering who I was outside of the relationship. I spent time with friends, picked up some old hobbies, and gradually started to feel happier again. I kept in mind that life is about growth and learning from our experiences. If someone can betray your trust once, they can do it again. I decided I wasn't going to put myself in that position again. Eventually, I learned to move on from the bitterness and hurt. It was a challenging process, but it also taught me a lot about my self-worth. I came out of it a better person, more determined than ever to build a future that's in line with my values and dreams. I knew I was better off without that burden holding me back. While I still thought about the time we'd spent together, I was ready to embrace the new opportunities that lay ahead.